All right. I think we're live. All right. Welcome, welcome. Oh. Do we have any viewers? Looks like we have a viewer. Welcome. Oh. All right. Well, I'll give people a few minutes to show up, and then I'll get started. But thank you to anyone who shows up, and thank you to anyone watching this. Looks like I have one viewer right now. Hello, single viewer. I don't know who you are, but thank you. I'll just give it a few more minutes, and then I'll just start. All right. Two concurrent viewers. Nice. Welcome, welcome. Yeah. If we don't have many viewers, that's all right. This will just be, it's also recorded, so. But welcome to whoever is here. Hope you're having a great Friday. Let's give it maybe, a couple more minutes, 7:05 or something. All right. Just a little longer. All right. Let's get started. All right. So, welcome everyone. Hello. Welcome to the second episode of Faith Fridays. This episode is entitled Faith and Belief. And so, yeah, that's the topic today. I want to talk about faith and belief and what people mean by those terms, because I think they're often misunderstood. So, yeah, that'll be our subject for today. But first, first, I want to. My plan is to start these off with a little segment called Miracle Corner. I will just present some piece of evidence for Christianity, and this will just be a little segment to start off each video. So, first of all, I want to do just a quick follow up on Fatima. I talked a lot about Fatima last week, but one thing with Fatima that I think a lot of people perhaps found unsatisfactory or perhaps suspicious is the explanations I offered for okay, not everyone saw the supposed miracle, and it didn't show up in photographs, right? And my answer to that was more or less, well, it's a miracle. Like anything could happen. It's not guaranteed that everyone will see it. It's not guaranteed that it will show up in photographs. And I can imagine that many people found that sort of unsatisfactory, right? Like, how convenient. Oh man, you can just sort of explain away anything if you want, because it's a miracle, right? I think this is kind of fair, right? Like, you can't give yourself infinite leeway to explain away anything just because we're talking about miracles. So a theory must make strong predictions, and it can't just sort of if you give it too much leeway, then it's not a real prediction or anything. But I would say that the miracle theory, so to speak, does make strong predictions, or it did. You might say that in advance, wouldn't you have predicted that the miracle would show up on photographs or something? And I would say probably, I probably would have predicted that, but it wouldn't have been a strong prediction. I would say the strong prediction that a believer would have made, or like the little girls would have, the little children would have made involving Fatima, would be that there would be conversions. So, that was in some sense the whole point. They were pleading with the Virgin Mary because they wanted people to believe them. And so they made a prediction that, okay, whatever happens that day, whether or not everyone sees it, whether or not it's photographed, there will be conversions. Skeptics will be convinced, non-believers will become believers. And so this is a very strong prediction, and it's one that could easily have been falsified. And I think I would also say that, an atheist would have made an equally strong prediction that, there shouldn't be any conversions. Nothing is going to happen. So why would any hardened skeptic, be convinced? So that, I think, is sort of worth meditating on. If you're an atheist, if you're not convinced by Fatima, why were there so many conversions that day? If nothing was going on, if the crowd was just sort of caught up in some kind of religious hysteria, and all that was happening was just some clouds in the air, why were so many skeptics converted? Why did they get sort of pulled along into this religious hysteria? Why didn't they just say, like, nothing's happening, there's just some clouds? Anyway, okay, I've probably already, you've heard enough about Fatima, so I should move on. But anyway, yeah, that's my follow-up to Fatima. Okay, miracle for this week. Lourdes, France. I don't know if you've heard of Lourdes, but this is a very interesting case. The basic story, Lourdes is just a small town in southern France. And like Fatima, it was the site of an alleged Marian apparition of the Virgin Mary in 1858. But it is actually not most known for the apparition itself. It became more well known afterwards because it became famous as a place of healing. People started reporting miracle cures when they, bathed in the Lourdes water. There was a spring where the apparition took place. So eventually, there got to be so many sort of reports of cures and miraculous healings that the Catholic Church set up a panel, a permanent panel to investigate these claims. So they created the International Lords Medical Committee, which is a panel of 20 to 30 medical experts, and basically they would just sort of take claimed supposed miraculous healings and investigate them, and determine whether or not they were actually miraculous or whether they could be explained medically. So the criteria that they're given for investigating these cures is that the original diagnosis has to be verified and confirmed. They have to make sure that the person was actually sick with what they thought, what they were said to have had. The diagnosis must have been regarded as, incurable with the medicine of the current time. The cure must happen in association with a visit to Lourdes, and the cure must be immediate, complete, and permanent. Okay, so these investigations they take them pretty seriously. They take a minimum of 5 years to ensure that the cure is permanent, but in many cases they go on for over a decade. The panel is generally made up of believing practicing Catholics, but not exclusively. But either way, this is something that they sort of clearly take seriously, and they go out of their way to do a rigorous investigation. And to date, they have found 70 cases where they've basically declared them to be inexplicable by current medical understanding. That there was a cure, that an incurable disease was cured immediately, completely, and permanently. This is, anyway, let's look at some of these cases, and you can decide for yourself, basically, whether or not you think these are sort of inexplicable or not. Are these, whether they're miraculous or not. So, this is the most exciting part of the live stream, where I just read big blocks of text. I promise I won't do this every week, but okay. So one case, Marie Bailey, 1902. This is testimony from Alexis Carroll, who was eventually went on to be a Nobel Prize-winning doctor. But on the train, he encountered Marie Bailey, who was suffering from acute tuberculous peritonitis and considerable abdominal distension with large, hard masses. Though Marie Bailey was half conscious, Carroll believed that she would pass away quite quickly after arriving at Lourdes, if not before. Other physicians on the train agreed with this diagnosis. When the train arrived at Lourdes, Marie was taken to the grotto, where 3 pitchers of water were poured over her distended abdomen. After the first pour, she felt a searing pain. After the second pour, it was lessened. Finally, after the third pour, she experienced a pleasant sensation. Her stomach began to flatten, and her pulse returned to normal. Carroll was standing behind Marie, along with other physicians, taking notes as the water was poured over her abdomen. He wrote, "The enormously distended and very hard abdomen began to flatten, and within 30 minutes it had completely disappeared. No discharge whatsoever was observed from the body. Marie then sat up in bed, had dinner without vomiting, and got out of her bed on her own and dressed herself the next day." Okay. Francis Pascal, 1938. This was a 4-year-old. In December 1937, Francis developed meningitis at the age of 3¼ years. He did not die from it, but had sequelae: paralysis of the lower limbs, flaccid paraplegia, and to a lesser degree in the upper limbs, and loss of vision. Prognosis absolutely unfavorable. All this was certified by at least a dozen doctors who had been consulted before the child was taken in this state to Lourdes at the end of August 1938. It was after the second bath that Francis recovered his sight and lost his paralysis. When he returned home, he was examined again by 2 or 3 doctors who had previously seen him. They all spoke of a definitive cure, and that medically it could not be explained. Okay, so here we have, I probably shouldn't read them all, it takes too long, but here we have a case of someone with tumors and cancer, but, well, okay, she underwent a total hysterectomy, had carcinoma, she developed pelvic metastasis, became cachexic. After the third bath, she got up, had no more pain, behaved like a normal individual, but needed to be detoxicated from all the morphine she had consumed previously. Returning home, there were neither functional signs nor leukorrhea, and what is more, not the slightest trace of her tumor. This is an interesting one. Vittorio Michelli. In 1962, Vittorio Michelli, a soldier in the Italian army, developed rapidly increasing pain in his left buttock region. X-rays of the hip showed osteolysis involving the ilium and the roof of the acetabulum. A biopsy of the gluteal muscles showed cells of a sarcomatous nature. He was not deemed to be a candidate for medical intervention, so neither radiotherapy nor chemotherapy was offered to him. In 1963, racked with pain and unable to walk, he made a pilgrimage to Lourdes, following which he was cured of his sarcoma. Michelli was cured from sarcoma of the pelvis without medical explanation. He did not undergo any specific treatment. He did not suffer from any susceptible intercurrent infection that might have had an influence on his sarcoma. He was able to walk again 1 month after his return from Lourdes. A completely destroyed articulation was spontaneously reconstructed without surgery. So his joint was reconstructed. He didn't have a pelvis, essentially, and it sort of was spontaneously reconstructed. The leg, which had been useless, became sound. He was alive and well 9 years after his return from Lourdes. Michelli's sarcoma was medically certain and incurable. No curative treatment was given. Following his pilgrimage to Lourdes, the evolution of his sarcoma was suddenly modified. The cure is effective and lasting. No medical explanation of his cure can be given. Okay. And here's a recent one. Well, I won't read it, but you could read it if you want later. But these are still ongoing. Anyway, okay. So the basic takeaway here is that there have been a lot of reported cures. Thousands of people saying, "Okay, I was cured when I went to Lourdes," and basically, if you actually read, if you go through and read a lot of these cases, they are very, very striking. The sheer number and the dramatic nature of them is just, to me, the more you look into it, the more it is difficult to deny that, something interesting is going on. Now, many skeptics will emphasize, okay, these are inexplicable by current medical understanding. This is usually the phrasing that's used by the committee. And so most end up proposing some kind of somatic and mental process that we do not know about, So this is either, some kind of, essentially something like the placebo effect. They went in to Lourdes with an expectation of a cure, and through some kind of autosuggestion process, they healed themselves, or perhaps, What's the success rate of people with ailments being cured versus those who try? Oh, good question. I have no idea. I imagine it's a small percentage. But I suppose that's... Yeah, I imagine it's a small percentage, but of course, any amount being healed miraculously is sort of anomalous. But anyway, I guess I would just say that, if you find this at all intriguing, just look into Lourdes. Just read about it more. The more you read about it, the more it's hard to deny that something is going on. And this is sort of a common thing. The closer someone is to Lourdes, the more they've looked into it, the more they say, okay, well, this is weird. There's something beyond our understanding. And usually they'll sort of say something like, okay, this is, inexplicable by our current medical understanding, but perhaps we will, come up with some explanation later. And so typically they don't, they don't immediately convert or become believers. But I do think it is worth asking yourself, explanation could there be? Like, what would that look like? Some future scientific explanation. You know, there really shouldn't be anything like this. There's a wide variety of completely different diseases being cured instantaneously, all associated with this one religious site. I mean, you know, if you're going to say that it's something involving somatic and mental processes, maybe, but you just have to be careful that you're not sort of attributing to somatic and mental processes, you know, powers that they do not have. Like, they should not be able to reconstruct hip bones or make tumors disappear or make, you know, abdominal masses disappear sort of very suddenly and instantly. But anyway, as usual, I offer these up not to convince people per se, but just to perhaps make people think. And, you know, I am trying to open people's minds and hopefully, you know, give them pause. But anyway, all right. So that's Miracle Corner for today. So, great. But all right, the main thing I wanted to talk about today is faith and belief, because again, like I said, I think a lot of people either misunderstand these terms or use them in different ways. So I want to talk about how I understand these terms, at least, keeping in mind that, you know, I'm very new to Christianity. So, but anyway, so let's start off with belief. All right, what is belief? What does it mean to say that we believe something? Like, in the sense of, like, I believe it's true. Like, if I say that I believe that 2 + 2 = 4, or that, you know, it's raining outside, or that you know, Australia exists or something. These are beliefs, and, you know, I say, okay, I believe that these are true. What does that actually mean? What does it mean to say, you know, I believe something is true? Can we sort of break that apart more and try and understand it? So, what I would say, I think the best way of understanding what a belief is that beliefs are expectations. So beliefs consist of expectations. If something is a true, real belief that you have, there should be expectations associated with it, in the sense of there are things that you would expect to happen and things that you wouldn't expect to happen. You know, this should happen, this definitely should happen, this might happen, this definitely shouldn't happen. That is sort of the content of a belief, is the associated sort of expectations. So you might say a belief is sort of a constraint on future expectations. So if I believe that it's, you know, say I believe that it's raining outside, but my curtains are closed, I expect that if I, you know, open my curtains, I will see rain, and I expect that there's things that I expect will not happen, like I don't expect a neighbor to call me up and talk about how nice a day it is and how they're outside in the sun or something. So, okay, anyway, beliefs come with expectations. So, what does it actually mean to believe in Christianity? To say, I believe Christianity is true? Well, you know, on the one hand, it's sort of obvious. Okay, well, Christianity makes a bunch of truth claims, right? Yeah, expectation is a huge part. Yeah, absolutely, Andrew. Yeah, so believing in Christianity, on the one hand, it's just sort of like you believe, like, there are the truth claims of Christianity, right? There's, you know, you believe that God exists, that God has this particular nature as a Trinity. You believe that God actually came down to the earth as a person, Jesus Christ. That person died and then was resurrected, right? So these are all things that you believe are true. But the sort of interesting thing about them is those things by themselves do not constrain expectations that much. this is sort of an interesting thing. Like when I first started when I first started to think, okay, Christianity might actually be true. And I first started saying, okay, I guess I do believe in God. I guess I do believe that Jesus Christ is God and that he was resurrected. This was a big shift for me, but at the same time, I found it oddly sort of difficult to grab onto. I was like, okay, well, wait, though, what is it that I actually believe here in terms of, like, what is the content of this belief? Yes, I believe that, okay, Jesus Christ was, resurrected 2,000 years ago, so but what does that mean in terms of future expectations? What has changed? So, there were some, you can talk about silly ones, like, okay, I expect in the future that if I got a time machine and then went back into the past and looked at, and I would see Jesus being resurrected or something, but these are sort of silly. But in a lot of ways I was sort of struggling to say, all right, what do I expect? And like I said, there are sort of some that are just sort of, they're not like sort of strong expectations, but you expect that Christianity will, I don't know, have depth to it. Like, okay, I will start studying it, and I will read all these books about theology and from the spiritual masters, and I will find that there is, something there, something real. And so these books will be sort of full of depth, and, they will sort of not prove to be empty, and that is sort of an expectation about the future. And you expect maybe that potentially you might have religious experiences. You might during prayer. But again, this isn't sort of a strong expectation. But I had trouble with it at first because, the real true expectation of Christianity is a hard one to face up to. The real sort of actual expectation that is associated with Christianity that makes it sort of a real belief is, the judgment seat. So Andrew sort of more or less got it, although he's talking about, Andrew in the chat is talking about, end times, the Christ's second coming. But we can't know for sure whether, when that will occur. So we can't necessarily expect it within our lives. But what we can expect as Christians, if you believe Christianity, then what you believe is that there will come a time when you draw your last breath. And then after that, you will come before God. So this is, you will come before God and you will be judged. You will be judged based on what you did in this life. And you will be judged based on how you judged others in this life. So this, this is more or less sort of the core of what it means to believe in Christianity, is to know that this is what you are heading towards. That we are heading towards the judgment seat, and then after that, our eventual fate, good or bad. But I think I had trouble at first because that is a lot to face up to. It's a scary thing to face up to. And not just, facing up to the concept of hell, the reality of hell, is very, very difficult. But even facing up to the reality of heaven, like accepting that might be true, even that I found very, very difficult. For a long time I didn't sort of allow myself to think about heaven at all, even as a possibility. And I think in some ways I was trying to sort of prove that I wasn't just believing this because I wanted it to be true. Like I wasn't just being sucked in by the promise of heaven. So I was like, I won't even think about heaven. I'll be a hard-nosed skeptic and just try and, just go based off the evidence or something. But even so, the idea of heaven is surprisingly hard to face up to. And I mean, I think I would say in general that um, Christianity in general, fully accepting the truth of Christianity, is difficult to face up to, and I would say just impossible to fully face up to as a human. It's just not something that we can sort of fully. Isn't the judgment just a tool to make people live a good life? Well, I mean, it depends. If you don't think Christianity is real, then I guess you would think that it is just a tool to make people live a good life. If you believe, if you genuinely believe that Christianity is real, that God exists, the judgment is about justice. It's about sort of, according to people, their position in eternity based on sort of justly based on, how they lived their life. But either way, whatever it is certainly an expectation, right? It is if you believe in Christianity really, then you expect to eventually sit on the judgment seat, right? But yeah. Anyway, it's a lot to face up to. Not just the bad stuff, but even the good stuff. Oddly, it is a lot. And like I said, I don't think in a way any Christian can fully face up to it. It's something that you sort of face up to as much as you are able to, and then hopefully each day you face up to it more. Because to live sort of fully consistently with Christianity is impossible. It just is. We can't do it. But we can, get better at it. We can try to live more and more consistently with our beliefs every day. Anyway, so as Andrew pointed out, there is also the expectation of the eventual second coming of Christ, which no one knows the time or the day or the hour, but that absolutely is, eventually, yes, that is an expectation. All right, so that is more or less what I would say about, that's kind of what I wanted to say about belief. Like, this is, beliefs are defined by their expectations. This is, I would say, the core expectation of Christianity. And I would say that, there is such a thing as sort of false beliefs, or like beliefs that aren't really real beliefs because they don't have attached expectations. Like, heaven sent law. I assumed it was, sorry, I assumed it was Andrew. I'm sorry. Mark? Is it Mark? Jeez. Anyway. What was I saying? Oh yeah, anyway, there can be sort of like these false beliefs where we sort of say we believe things, but it's just, there's no actual real associated expectations. So we say, we might sort of say, I believe that, all right, good. Hey Mark, sorry about that. My bad. I might say that I believe Canada is the greatest country in the world or something. But there aren't any actual associated, expectations about the future that are different versus if I, didn't say that. So there can be such a thing as sort of like, fake beliefs or just beliefs that we profess or something. But Christianity brings with it real expectations and, expectations that are hard to face up to. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say about belief. But more importantly, faith. All right, faith is a very interesting subject. What is faith? So people talk about faith in a lot of different ways. And oftentimes it's portrayed as sort of, oftentimes it's portrayed as sort of like the opposite of reason. Like, or say, we're just supposed to take this on faith. Meaning, we're supposed to, like, it's sort of virtuous to believe things for no reason or something, or to like, make ourselves believe something by faith. um, which is not at all what faith is about. Just not even a little bit. But I think a lot of people have an impression that's at least sort of like that. That faith is in some way about sort of just turning off your brain and just, not thinking about things. But I want to sort of argue against that and say, no, that's not what faith is about at all. I would say what faith is about is trust. So I would say that whenever you hear the word faith, usually, or at least most of the time, you can sort of replace it with the word trust and it will sort of make sense, right? Like I have faith in this, I have faith in God, I have trust in God. So usually when people are talking about faith, they mean something like trust. This is what I mean by it. But I would also say that specifically there are two different kinds of faith that you can talk about. One you might call faith that, and the other you might call faith in. So faith that would be like faith that God exists. So this is sort of faith when it comes to belief. So I'll talk a bit about that. But then faith in would be sort of like faith in God. Okay, I put my trust in God. I already accept that he exists, but then separately I have to decide whether or not to trust him, to put my faith in him. And so that would be sort of the second kind of faith. So these, I would say, are the these are the two kind of main types of faith. There's two different kinds. So first of all, faith that God exists, faith when it comes to belief. So I think, like I said, some people have a picture that you're supposed to just take the existence of God sort of purely on faith, that you believe that God exists sort of essentially for no reason. And this is, a virtuous thing to do. But like I said, that's really not what faith is about at all. So when it comes to faith and belief, what I would say is that imagine a world where you have been convinced that Christianity is true already. Maybe through reason, through arguments, through experience or evidence, or historical evidence, any number of things. You say, okay, I've been convinced that Christianity is true. Now, if you're in that state and you've been sort of convinced that Christianity is true for good reasons, by using sort of reason, it will still be the case that you will experience doubts. And I mean, this is more or less true of anything, not just Christianity. It is sort of the nature of human knowledge that it is never certain, right? We can be sort of almost like very, very close to certain about some things, but you can never be 100% certain. And so that leaves room for doubts, and doubts tend to crop in, especially in cases where we are, say, afraid, or there can be any number of reasons. But so this isn't just sort of this is nothing unique to Christianity. You can imagine cases where you have very certain beliefs that you arrived at for good reason, through reason. You can imagine maybe you have a belief that ghosts don't exist, and you believe that ghosts don't exist for very good reasons. Now, imagine you then go to a house that is supposedly haunted, and you are there alone, and it's getting dark, and you start to feel scared. Now, is it the case that you have suddenly sort of, started believing in ghosts? Well, no, not necessarily. You haven't sort of encountered any new evidence that would change your mind. You arrived at the conclusion that ghosts didn't exist through reason. But still, you might start getting scared. And so, one way of thinking about faith is sort of faith is something that tides your beliefs over through periods of fear. So you might be in this haunted house and you might be sort of in the moment scared, but you might say to yourself, okay, I know that ghosts don't exist. I have a certain amount of sort of faith in that belief. And so even though I'm scared right now, I am going to sort of, carry on. And I'm going to, I will try and master my fear or something. So you can think about faith in this terms, in this context, as sort of faith in a reasoned conclusion that you came to through reason, but is sort of now subject to doubt because of our human fears and irrationalities. Because it's, it is not the case that if we sort of arrive at the conclusion that something is true, that belief will just sort of, we will automatically act in accordance with that belief, and we will be consistent with it, and we will always keep believing it, right? We are just not we're not perfect reasoners, and we are not perfectly consistent, and we are just, emotional, irrational creatures subject to doubts, right? And so this is one way of thinking about faith. It's sort of like this rock that you cling to. It's you are not supposed to arrive at the idea that God exists, for no reason. You are supposed to sort of arrive at it for good reasons, because of arguments and evidence and that kind of reason. But after you have arrived at it, the purpose of faith is to sort of remind you that God exists even when it doesn't seem like it. You have faith that God exists, and you sort of use that to, keep you sure that God exists even when you're battling fear and doubts, right? So that, I would say, is sort of one sense of the word. We are all still animals when it comes to our survival. Yes, exactly. Fear can make us think anything. So that is one sense of the, one way of using the word faith. I have faith that God exists. And this sense of the word faith is, I would say, not just, not opposed to reason. It is reason's greatest champion. It is saying, no, we are going to stick with the conclusion that we arrived at through reason, because this is just, your dumb brain being scared or something. So, in a way, you could call this kind of faith, faith in reason. I have faith in reason even when, I'm too scared to believe this reasoned conclusion is true. So that is one kind of faith. And, it's a real kind of faith, and it's sort of, and I rely on that. I have faith that God exists, because there is always that room for doubt for anything, not just for God, but, in a certain sense, especially with God, because, we never get to know for sure until we die. That is true. Then we will know for certain. But there is, there's always that room for doubt. And so you do have to have a certain amount of faith, but that faith is not opposed to reason. It's not about believing something for no reason. You should believe for good and proper reasons to start out with. But faith tides you over through fear. Okay, so that is one way of talking. That is sort of one aspect of faith. But I would say the more important aspect about faith is, not faith that God exists, but faith in God. Trust in God, right? Like if a parent says to their child, I believe in you, they're not saying I believe you exist. Hopefully they're saying something more than that, I trust you, I put my trust and faith in you. So this is the more sort of important notion of faith. This is, as Christians, we don't just believe in God, we don't just trust that God exists. We put our faith in God. We put our trust in God. So what does that actually mean? Well, I mean, it means that we sort of, we trust God in the sense of, okay, we're going to, well, try and live a life in accordance with with His teachings. We will try and, you know, I believe that you exist. Good boy. Yeah, so, we put our trust and faith in God in the sense of like, okay, I am trusting that, that all of this has a purpose, that there is some plan at hand, and that, I should try and live my life as a Christian. I should try and model my life on Christ. I should observe all of His commandments and teachings, that sort of thing. I should trust God. So, on the one hand, that sort of sounds good, and it's like, okay, yeah, I should trust God. All right, God exists. I guess I should trust Him. But this is not an easy thing to do, right? If you try, when things are going good, sure, okay, like whatever, I go to mass, I pray, but then, man, you are faced with fears, and you are faced with sort of pressure from other people to not believe, or you're faced most of all with trials, like when you're suffering, and when you're put through sort of just inexplicable seemingly suffering, right? Just you have incurable pain, or your child of a year old died, and you say, God, why did this happen? Why should I trust you? So trusting God, putting our full sort of trust in God, our full faith in God, is not easy. Well, why do we do it? Why should you trust God? Why as Christians should we say, okay, yes, I put my full and complete trust in God? Because here we get into kind of like the problem of evil, the problem of suffering, right? Why trust God when we look around us and there's so much suffering, so much evil, so much seemingly pointless suffering. We say, okay, well, it seems like we have a God who is capricious and arbitrary. He's just kind of lets things happen randomly. Why should I put my trust in a God like that? So, it's a good question, obviously. It's the question in a way. And, it's not a question that, that anyone can sort of, I'm not going to provide an answer to the problem of evil tonight, but I will tell you, I guess, what I think as a sort of new Christian. Why do I put my faith in God? Despite all of, the whole world, right? Ultimately, yeah, I guess I put my faith in God because essentially we are children. We are children before God, right? As a children is to their parent, we are to God. Except, the gap between a child and their parent is nothing compared to the gap between us and God, right? We as humans are kind of finite, fallible kind of reasoners, and God is infinite, all-knowing, right? Perfect. So the gap is sort of, incomparably greater. But even just looking at kids and parents, I think God, I think God made us the way He did to teach us an important lesson. Like, He didn't have to make us the way He did, right? He could have made us anyway. He didn't have to make it so that we, He could have had it that when new humans were created, they just sort of sprung into existence fully formed. But He made it so that two people had to come together, and when a new human was created, they start off completely helpless and completely dependent on their parents. And they start to grow, and they start to understand more things, but always there are things as children that they just cannot understand, right? And there are lots of things that their parents do that just seem cruel, inexplicable and cruel. Why are you making me do this, Mom and Dad? I can't imagine a reason. But hopefully, if they're good parents, the kid has reason enough to trust them, to trust that, okay, my parents love me, and, they seem to love me, even though they do all of these sort of cruel things that I can't understand. And so, all right, I guess I have to trust them. And then, as a kid, you eventually grow up, and you get to the other side of it, and you say, oh, okay, like, I get it now. Like, I understand why it had to be this way. I couldn't understand before, but now I can see. And then, if you actually end up as a parent, which I'm not, but I've at least seen it, I can't imagine sort of, as someone who's not a parent, I can't imagine sort of the agony of parenthood in a way. I mean, parenthood is an incredible gift, but there's a sort of agony to it in the sense of, like, I could see it. Just, you love your kids so, so much, and you just want the best for them. But, there's just so much that they cannot understand. And there's things that you want to explain to them that you can't. And so you have to make them do things that they hate. And you say it's for your own good, but they can't understand that. And you just have to do it. And the only way that you can really kind of show them that you love them is by, making sacrifices, right? Sacrifice after sacrifice. You can say, look at all the things I am doing for you. And you hope to get across to them, like, look, like, I wouldn't be doing all of this if I didn't love you. But I mean, kids can't really understand. I mean, we can't understand as kids sort of how much our parents sacrifice, and how much they do for us. We can't really be properly appreciative in any sense. So yeah, we kind of go through this lesson in life where we learn, this lesson of sort of parenthood and childhood. And I think sort of part of the reason why God set things up this way is to teach us, that, yeah, that's kind of what's going on. We are children before God, and there are things that we just, of course there are going to be things that we cannot understand. I mean, we're dealing with God. We're dealing with an infinite being, an infinite perfect being, and we are finite. Like, of course there are going to be things that don't make sense, that we cannot understand. And so, we have to sort of put our trust in God. But, the question still remains, like, okay, but why, why trust God, though? Should we put our trust in God? And then I think we get to sort of the heart of Christianity, Why trust God? I mean, we can imagine many different types of God, right? Like, you can imagine a God that just sort of spoke to us all the time directly, or a God who, well, God could have done any number of things. He could have revealed himself to us any number of ways, but what he chose to do was come down to earth as a human. He chose to incarnate himself as a human. He chose to live a life as a human, sort of a life of humility and poverty. He didn't sort of come down as some king to have riches and be worshipped. He came down to live a life of humility and poverty, and live a life as a suffering servant. He came down and he washed the feet of his disciples. God himself came down and washed the feet of his disciples, and then he suffered the ultimate sort of humiliation and rejection, and sort of died, offered his life in sacrifice as sort of the most, in the most sort of painful and agonizing death it's possible to go through. So, he didn't have to do that. And so this, to me, like I said, I think is sort of the heart of Christianity. We seem to have in some way a humble God. It's just really strange the more you think about it. We have a God. Humility makes sense for us. We're created. We're nothing before God. We're just, created. We're just creatures. But he's God himself. There's no reason for him to be humble. He is God. And yet, it seems to be that we have a humble God. And he came down and he humbled himself before us, and he sacrificed himself. And so when I look at sort of the story of Jesus, I sort of think of a parent. I think of a parent sort of, saying to their children, or wanting to say, like, you have no idea how much I love you and how much it pains me to see you suffer. But you just cannot understand. There are things that you cannot understand. You can't understand why it has to be this way. And so the only thing I can do, the only way I can show you that, yes, I love you, is to, like with parents, to make sacrifices, to make the ultimate sacrifice. And so that is sort of the way I think about the cross, is sort of God's, God offering up proof, like, yep, I love you. This is Matt, humble. The all-powerful being needs the obedience of prayers of millions of people. Sounds like a narcissist, which is like some parents. Okay, yes. Look, obviously, we are, we as Christians, we're called to worship God, and we should worship God. But it is striking, like, it is striking the life that Jesus lived on this earth. He sort of, God set it up so that he was born into poverty. He was born into a manger, and then he lived a life of poverty, and then, like I said, he humbled himself before his disciples. But anyway, so, right, what's my point here? My point is, I guess, what, this is, in some ways, this is sort of like, this is the central problem is, like, how can you trust God, right? God is beyond you, so there's sort of, you can't ever sort of understand God or know God, or you can't put God in a box and say, like, okay, I fully understand things. God is beyond you. So how do you trust him? And the solution that Christianity offers is that, God came down on earth as a human and sacrificed himself to sort of show us that, yes, I love you, even if despite all this suffering and the terrible things that happen, um, I'm telling you, there's a reason it has to be this way, and so yeah, that is sort of, this is how I think about faith more or less. Is it's sort of the faith that a child has in his parents, and that is sort of the faith that I have in God. So now, but sort of going back originally, we talked about sort of faith and reason and how reason relates to faith. So how does this notion of faith relate to reason? I guess I would say that it's sort of like, in a sense, it's complementary to faith. Reason is complementary to faith, or to this sense of the word faith. So, first of all, reason is like a great thing. It is a gift from God, and it is, an amazing gift, and we should use it as much as we can. We should try and understand things through reason as much as we can. But it is also true that some things are going to be beyond reason. Like, this is, sort of exactly what you would expect. In a world where God exists, and God is beyond us and infinite, there are going to be things that we cannot understand, that we cannot grasp, right? That is just sort of, it would, have to be that way, essentially. And so given that, there's going to be a point where reason just kind of can't go any further. Like, you can almost say it's, and sort of through reason, you can sort of see why that would be the case. So reason reaches a point where it says, okay, there's going to be some things that are beyond us and some things that are mysterious. And after that point, you have to kind of hand things off to faith and say, all right, from here on, this is one of those things I can't understand. So I trust God. I put my faith in God. Why? Well, because, not because of the cross, ultimately. But yeah, so reason and faith. Yeah. I mean, in some ways, this does sound sort of closer to the kind of the classical notion of faith that's sort of opposed to reason, because they're, Christians will say things like, oh, well, like, you're not supposed to understand this, like, it's a mystery, like, don't think about it, don't reason about it. And you'd say, what? I'm supposed to, like, turn off my brain? But again, no, it's just, it is not saying that it is a bad thing to reason about these sort of mysteries, or that it would be bad to understand them. It is just saying we cannot understand them. They are beyond us. So there comes a point where reason just cannot understand things, and so then we turn to faith. So yeah, that I guess this is sort of the second sense of faith, the faith as trust in God. And that's sort of what I wanted to talk about. Why have faith in God? So yeah, I would sort of propose in a way as a definition of faith, it is trust, but I would say faith is a justified trust in something that is beyond you. So faith is trust, but it's not sort of arbitrary trust. It's not trust for no reason. It is justified. It's sort of based on reason fundamentally. But it is justified trust in something that is beyond you. Why something that is beyond you? Because, if it wasn't beyond you, then you could just, understand it, and then you wouldn't need faith at all. You could just say, I understand this. Yeah, well, Matt says faith is when we don't have the time or resources to understand something. Yeah, I mean, I'd say that also works, but that's sort of, it's essentially beyond you then. It's beyond your sort of current understanding based on what you have time to understand. I mean, look, we put faith, we put faith in a lot of things. Like, I have faith in that my computer will work. I would say that is a justified trust in something that is beyond me. I don't really understand how the computer works, so it's beyond me. But it's a justified trust. It's not based on nothing. So, I think it's reasonable to say I have, faith in my computer. and in a similar way, I have faith in God. So yeah, all right. That more or less is all I had that I wanted to talk about. So yeah, we had Lords, which is again an interesting case. I think it's hard to deny that something interesting is going on there, and once you accept that something interesting is going on, it's hard to see what else it could be. So yeah, if you're curious about Lords, just look into it more. There are a lot of cases, a lot of case studies, a lot of very sort of striking, seemingly miraculous cures. And then yeah, belief and faith. So belief is all about expectations, and faith is not opposed to reason. There's two kinds of faith: faith as it pertains to belief, and then faith as it pertains to sort of putting trust in things. And yeah, I think there's sort of, yeah, I talked about sort of why I put my trust in God, why I have faith in God. So yeah, that's all I have. That's all I have for today. If anyone has questions, feel free to shoot a question. One question I got last week, just at the end of the stream, which I sort of closed the stream before I could answer it. Someone asked me, how important are miracles to my faith? And that is a good question. And I would say that the answer is they were a lot more important like earlier on. Like when I was first starting, was plagued by a lot of doubts. And so I was, reading about all these miracles, and they were sort of, I would use them to kind of reassure myself. And this is kind of like the faith and belief thing. I sort of, when I would have doubts that God existed, I would just sort of remember these, all these miracles that were very convincing. But they've since become much less important and much less central. I've had so many just sort of personal experiences involving God that it's just sort of, it would be impossible to deny that God exists for me. So the miracles are, I think, still very compelling and striking and convincing evidence, but they're not sort of at the center of my faith in the same way anymore. But anyway, any other questions? I don't know. All right. Well, no questions. Fair enough. Yeah. Well, yeah. If people do have any questions, you can. Why Christianity over other religions? Matt says. Excellent question. I mean, I would just say because the evidence is there. I've been, other than the obvious bias of where you grew up. Yeah, right. I mean, that is a charge that people could lay against me. Like I was raised Catholic, and wow, coincidentally, you just discovered that Catholicism is the correct one, right? I mean, there's not much I can say to that. In a world where sort of Catholicism, is actually true, like, what am I supposed to do? If I'm following the evidence and it turns out that Catholicism is true, I can't sort of not believe it just because it sort of sounds convenient that I was raised Catholic. I mean, so, but anyway, ultimately, why Christianity over other religions? Because, the evidence is there. Because I'm convinced. I've been convinced by the evidence that it's true. And beyond that, sort of, since being convinced, I have had just so many sort of undeniable personal experiences that I can't not believe. The Nicene Creed really relates hard to what you were discussing today. It's interesting to go over these in light of the creed and your perspectives. Maybe a future episode. Yeah. Okay. I love the creed. I know the Apostles' Creed better. I mean, and the Nicene Creed is sort of, there's more to it, I know, but I really do love the creed, and I agree. It's sort of, yeah. I agree. It would be interesting to go over the creed, and yeah, maybe I will leave that to a future episode, though, Mark. That is a good kind of that's an interesting, yeah, it's an interesting thing to bring up. I'll talk about that more for sure. Matt, you don't think they all aren't just different brands of the same thing, right? So that is, a position that many people hold, right? That sort of there is, maybe some God exists, or some, there's something sort of spiritual, and all religions are sort of each grasping at like different sort of truth, like different sort of facets of that truth. And so, like this religion has some of the truth, and this one has some. And yeah, I that is sort of, that is a possible way that the world could be, absolutely. But that is not, basically, that just hasn't been where the evidence points me. The evidence has pointed me specifically towards Christianity and Catholicism. And I mean, that's sort of some of what I'm, that's kind of what I'm trying to do with this sort of miracle corner thing. I will be showing more and more evidence as I go forward. But yeah, I mean, aren't they all just different brands of the same thing? No, that I've been sort of forced into the belief that Christianity is true, more or less. Yeah, that's where the evidence has led me. So. Yeah. All right. I think with that, I'll wrap it up. So what? Oh yeah, right. All right. Yeah. Anyway, so those of you who stuck with me, thank you so much for listening. I really, really appreciate it. And yeah, God bless. I hope to see you next week. Bye bye.